Can a simple modification in the rear suspension completely transform Ferrari's fate this season? What did Fred Vasseur discover in the secret test of Mugello that made him affirm that the SF-25 finally has a future? The rear axle lacked the necessary stiffness to keep the filming height stable under real dynamic applications. Every time the pilots attacked a curb, they passed an irregularity or stopped strongly, the SF-25 momentarily lost the balance. This variation caused a sudden loss of aerodynamic load, especially in the diffuser, which broke stability in the rear. The most immediate consequence was an unpredictable car. In classification, Leclerc and Hamilton had to take the car to the limit without knowing if that same limit would change from one curve to another. In the race, the tire temperature windows were closed faster than expected, forcing defensive strategies that never allowed the true career rhythm to exploit. The car was fast on a return in ideal conditions, but those moments were exceptional. Any minimum change in the wind, in the fuel load, or in the type of asphalt completely altered the balance of the car. The most critical point was lived in the China Grand Prix. Hamilton was disqualified by excessive wear in the flat bottom table. This incident was not isolated or product of a punctual error. It was the culmination of a trend that had been managing from the preseason tests. The rear suspension not only affected stability, but also compromised the legality of the car. Not being able to precisely control the filming heights, the SF-25 ended up scraping more than the account, which under specific conditions, as in Shanghai, crossed the regulatory limits. The internal data of the equipment confirmed that the deformation of the rear axle underside load was superior to the tolerable. In simulations, the SF-25 showed optimal performance on a flat track and without disturbances. But in the reality of Formula One, with potholes, aggressive pianos, and variable aerodynamic loads, the car lost efficiency. Each fast twist was accompanied by micro-corrections, locks, or unexpected overflows. The engineers began to see a pattern. The car was slower in the second running batches, and the comparisons between simulation and reality showed alarming differences. In that context, Vasseur and his technical team decided to go to the root of the problem. It was necessary to rethink from scratch the architecture of the rear suspension. Minor adjustments were not enough. It was redesign a key component of the car in full season, something that is not done lightly in Formula One. But Ferrari could not wait any longer. The opportunities were escaping and the talent of their pilots was diluted in a sea of technical inconsistency. The rear axle crisis of the SF-25 not only tested the technical capacity of the equipment, but also its reaction capacity. What was at stake was not only a 10th for return, but the very possibility of competing for the championship in a year where McLaren, Mercedes, and Red Bull would not give any respite. Ferrari's private test in Mugello on July 16th and 17th was much more than a simple test day. It was a high-risk strategic movement in search of a structural solution, designed not only to correct technical failures, but to reorient the competitive course of the team. Mugello, with its technical, demanding, and full of high-speed curves, was the ideal place to validate the fundamental changes introduced in the rear axle of the SF-25. Under the regulatory excuse of a filming day, Ferrari organized a 200-kilometer trial with a single objective: to understand if the new rear suspension could rescue the season. What was tested in Mugello was not a progressive evolution, but a reinvention of the concept of rear suspension. The redesign revolved around the lower anchor of the upper triangle, a key zone in the transfer of loads between the chassis and the gearbox. Ferrari decided to relocate this anchor point, moving it down into the monocoque of the box, a maneuver that completely modified the suspension geometry. This new design was made to reduce the dynamic variations in the filming height. That is, keep the distance between the flat background and the asphalt constant, even in borderline situations such as intense braking, sudden accelerations, or pianos transit. The effect of this modification was felt from the first turns. Hamilton and Leclerc coincided at a crucial point. The SF-25 no longer felt alive in the back. That, in terms of piloting, is an abysmal change. Before, any curve involved a small survival game with rear instability. Now, the car was beginning to respond more predictably. It was not an increase in immediate pure performance, but a transformation in the behavior of the car that allowed pilots to take it closer to the limit without fear of unpredictable reactions. But the improvement did not remain alone in the pilot. On a technical level, the data obtained in Mugello were revealing. The vertical pressure on the rear axle was distributed with greater uniformity, and the oscillations in the posterior aerodynamic load measured with pressure sensors in the diffuser were significantly reduced. The load peaks that previously caused instability were now much softer, which in turn generated a more stable environment for the functioning of the tires. This point is key. With this suspension, Ferrari could keep the Pirelli in their operational window for more turns, which opened new strategic possibilities both in classification and in race. In addition, engineers noticed an improvement in the efficiency of the anti-quad effect. This phenomenon, which describes the car's ability to prevent the rear from sinking excessively during acceleration, was an Achilles heel in the previous design. In Mugello, with the new system, the SF-25 showed a greater traction when leaving slow and sock curves, where he previously suffered for lack of support. This improvement not only reduced tire wear, but also allowed to apply more power in an early acceleration phase, crucial in critical traction circuits such as Hungary or Marina Bay. The team also simulated scenarios with different fuel loads and tire compounds to validate the adaptability of the new architecture. In all cases, the car was more docile, more manageable, and above all, more consistent in their answers. Vasseur and his technical group not only breathed relieved, they began to project the second part of the season with a renewed confidence. They knew this was a turning point. Finally, a symbolic but revealing detail. Hamilton, who had so far been contained in his statements, was visibly more satisfied after the test. His comments reflected a confidence that had not been seen since he joined the Scuderia. Leclerc, on the other hand, acknowledged that the car finally responded linearly to its inputs, something that had been claiming for months. The Mugello test was not a simple day of filming. It was a surgical act of crisis engineering. He was Ferrari taking the scalpel and rewriting, in record time, one of the most technical chapters of his season. And if this suspension is confirmed competitive in the race, it can mark the real rebirth of the SF-25. The test in Mugello marked a before and after. But as in every history in Formula One, a technical improvement is only the first chapter. What follows now for Ferrari is no less challenging, moving that promise of performance to the reality of the championship. The SF-25, with its new rear suspension, has shown unequivocal signs of progress. But the inevitable question is whether this improvement will be sufficient to cut the distance with McLaren, Mercedes and Red Bull in a calendar that does not give truce. This evolution of SF-25 redefines Ferrari's strategy for the World Cup. Until now, the team has been forced to run on the defensive. Conservative strategies, pilots taking fewer risks, and a car that forced to manage more than attack. With a more predictable car, the dynamics completely change. Ferrari can start playing the offensive, looking for more aggressive undercuts, extending stints with confidence, and above all, allow Leclerc and Hamilton to exploit their styles without stopping the performance with fear of the imbalance of the car. This also opens a new dimension in the battle between pilots within the team. Until now, Leclerc had been the most constant in terms of pure rhythm, but Hamilton has demonstrated an extraordinary ability to adapt, especially visible in the China sprint, where his symbiosis with the SF-25 was remarkable. With a more stable car, the difference between the two will be reduced to details: braking style, career reading, compound management. Ferrari could find a strategic dilemma if both begin to compete side by side on the track for victories, and internal management will be crucial so as not to compromise valuable points for a bad decision-making between their two-star pilots. It is not just the technical potential that changes with this suspension. It is the message that Ferrari launches to the rest of the paddock. They are no longer simply surviving, they are ready to compete. Continuous development will be key. If the rear axle works as expected, Ferrari can redirect resources to other critical areas of the car. The flat background, the efficiency of the DRS, and the interaction between the chassis and the hybrid system. Each tenth account, and now that they have stabilized the base, they can begin to refine the weapons with which a championship is really won. In terms of sports narrative, the SF-25 has ceased to be an unfulfilled promise and begins to position itself as a real combat tool. And with two of the best grid pilots behind the wheel, the competitive roof of the car can push Ferrari to a fight that just a few weeks ago seemed unattainable. It is not about imagining a title but about building it step by step, and Mugello was the first step. Now comes the most difficult part: confirm, sustaining and climbing. The championship is still open, and if Ferrari has demonstrated with this test, he has not said his last word. What Ferrari has done in Mugello is not just a technical step, it is a declaration of intentions. A team that seemed condemned to repeat errors from the past has shown that it can react, restructure and be again the narrative of a championship that becomes more unpredictable every day. But now the ball is on the roof of the spectators, of the fans, of whom they follow every detail with passion and analysis. And that's why we invite you to do more to look from the outside. We want to know what you think. Do you really believe that this new suspension will be enough for Ferrari to fully in the fight for the championship? Or do you think it is a punctual improvement, unable to close the gap with McLaren or Red Bull throughout such a demanding season? Do you consider that Hamilton can adapt enough to lead this comeback technique, or it will be Leclerc who takes the reins of this new red chapter?